It was really important to us from the beginning that we were honest enough to say, we are an education business that sells to schools. The likelihood of us becoming £1 billion product is very, very small. And also, we are there to deliver for our community of teachers. The second that we start really focusing on profit, we will lose those teachers and their goodwill.
Hello, today we have Laura McInerney, an educational journalist and co-founder of the daily survey app Teacher Tapp. Created in 2017, it is an app with a user base of 10,000 teachers, asking them 3 daily questions to gauge insights into teachers' lives and into the teaching industry as a whole. Founder Laura was also The Guardian's educational columnist and editor of the investigative newspaper Schools Week. A columnist for The Guardian, she has also written for other publications, including The Observer, The New Statesman, the TES, and Prospect. She regularly uses her school's expertise to appear on broadcasts including Radio 4's Today, Radio 5 Live, BBC London, LBC, Talk Radio, Newsnight, and Sky News. Welcome to the podcast.
Welcome. And now you know why I've got a really good microphone.
Yes, a very good one. Yeah, that's a sure, isn't it? That's the best one, I think. Anyway, right, so what I'm going to talk about today is not just the whole thing about fundraising, because this is what the podcast is all about. We want to tell stories of fundraising for other founders, but also we want to find out about the kind of transition between what takes a person from having, a really good job or having a career to then putting all that behind them and going full-time as a founder. So what can you tell us about that early point in your career and that sort of turning point?
Sure. So I was the editor of a newspaper, Schools Week, a very popular and good newspaper. So it was a great job at the time. And I had a co-founder, Becky, who was a professor of a big research center at the Institute of Education. So we had 2 meaty, chunky jobs. But what happened is that Becky got a phone call one day from an organization that had some cash available at the end of the financial year and wanted to give it to someone to set up an app for teachers. They were fairly relaxed about what this app would look like, but she needed to get match funding within 24 hours. Now, as an academic, she could set out and do that, which she did. The only thing was she had to set up a company to receive the cash and then figure out what to do with it. So I happened to be in her offices for a story that I was doing, chatted to her about it, and she said, look, why don't you help me do this thing? And because I was the editor of a paper, every week I was writing editorials and saying, teachers think this, teachers think that. But even if I'd spoke to 100 teachers, there's 500,000 of them. So, you're never really going to know. And I said, well, look, if this app can survey teachers and I can use it in my editorials, I will help you in my spare time to set up this company and actually launch the thing and run it. And she said, you're in. So that was September 2017. And for a year, Becky carried on at her job. I was editing a newspaper and we got a technical co-founder, a guy called Alex. He was a science teacher and he was teaching all year. So 12 months of this app that every single day at 3:30 p.m. goes off. And by the end of the year, about 3,000 teachers were on it every single day. And if anything went wrong at 3:30, we would literally have to get hold of Alex in his classroom because he taught till 3:45 with his laptop and try and figure it out. Or I would be in the middle of a newspaper meeting, or Becky would be trying to deal with a lecture. It was a nightmare. And at that point, we also had a bunch of people coming to us saying, we want to commission the research. So we had to figure out what we did because the original funding was running out. We couldn't carry on with our 3 jobs as well as run another company. But how do you quit when you don't quite have enough money to run it? You don't really know what to do. None of us had run a business before. And we just did. So Alex and I left our jobs in 2018 and started. Becky joined us at the end of the year. And we decided that we would raise some funds. We would set it up as a business and we'd make a go at it. And I honestly can't say if there was a moment or a day, but it felt like this thing had ground, 3,000 people doing it. People loved it. It existed. We had to put it onto a stable footing.
It's really interesting. So you started with the funding.
Yeah.
See, that's a very unusual journey, isn't it?
I believe so. And also
Mm.
it meant that when we did go in to raise funds the first time around, I think people didn't really believe us. I didn't realize how many people must go into pitches and say that a bunch of stuff exists, but it doesn't really. Whereas we really had an app that really did have 3,000 people a day using it, that had paying clients, that was doing quite well. But what we wanted was some more funding so that we could feel confident hiring people. I've never liked hiring people without their wages in the bank for a year, which I think is also a rule that Bill Gates at Microsoft had. And so we had some cash, but we didn't know how much was going to come in, and we needed to get some more help. And that's why we decided to go about and do that investment. And really, all I knew was that this was the kind of thing that happened on Dragon's Den. That was as much knowledge as we had.
That's really interesting. I mean, there is people on this podcast that I've interviewed that have managed to raise money without an app. You know, one in particular. So for you, it was getting some funding in initially, building the app, and seeing massive traction early on. But was that revenue generating traction?
It wasn't on the, as in we don't charge the teachers anything. They're on for free. They give us their time freely. We did have some people coming to us and saying, we want to commission you to do research on our behalf. So that was to set the questions up, do the analysis, like many other market research and polling companies would do. But we just didn't have the time to do it unless we left and we could pay ourselves some salaries. But then you were worried, well, what if we don't have enough clients coming in through the door? Plus our technology, we got it built for about £5,000 in 6 weeks in 2017. We did an incredible job, but then we had Alex building the front end, the back end, all by himself. 18 months in, of course, you need to get a bit more help, at least one other person, so there's some eyes on what's happening. And that's why we needed that little bit more investment.
Okay, so can you reveal what the initial amount of money was that you were able to set this all up for?
So the initial funding that came from Nesta and was match funded by the Gatsby Foundation, I think in total was £40,000. Mm-hmm. And that enabled us to do the development that we needed in the first 12 months and the expenses for the first 12 months, even just things like, you know, you have to pay the information commissioner's office. We needed servers, we needed software, we needed email addresses. I think we got insurance fairly early. We weren't paying ourselves a salary, but we got laptops, you know, the things and infrastructure that you need to set up. Plus, although the first version of the app that we did in 6 weeks cost us £5,000, there was this lovely moment where I said to Becky, so how do we get the questions in looking at the app? And she says, well, we need a front end. And I'm like, is that not in the app? And that's when I realized that when you look at an app, that is not all that the tech stack involves.
Yeah, absolutely. So £40,000 is a very small amount of money when you're trying to launch this kind of a project. So you must have done some amazing work to kind of make that last as long as it did. How long did that initial funding last you?
Nearly 2 years. So yeah. I mean, obviously I think we knew by 6 months before that. So after 18 months, we knew that we needed to do something, and it took us 6 months then to do the first investment raise. And we knew that SEIS was available, which is of course the tax breaks that are particularly generous for those very early starts. And we reckoned we needed about £150,000. So that's what we went out and looked for. It was really important to us from the beginning that we were honest enough to say, we are an education business that sells to schools. The likelihood of us becoming £1 billion product is very, very small. And also we are there to deliver for our community of teachers. The second that we start really focusing on profit, we will lose those teachers and their goodwill. So when we went out to angels in the first instance and a couple of people who were investors more broadly, especially early startup ones, we would go in with the view, we are not your 10X. We are a good, stable set of people who've already got good traction, who are doing a good thing. We will still exist in 3 years' time, so you will get your tax breaks. And if all goes well, there will be some level of return, but we don't guarantee that. Now, I understand that's very, very unusual, but I think it's about knowing your market, knowing who you want to invest in you. And there's no rules here, actually. You don't have to go out and say you're going to make £1 billion if you're not going to make £1 billion. In fact, you might look quite silly if you do that. There are people who are investing for all different types of reasons. Some are impact investors, some aren't particularly bothered, they just want the tax breaks. You know, there's all different people out there. You have to find your tribe. And I think we were very, very careful about who we got and what terms. And probably the most useful thing was that an organization called Capital Enterprise was running a 6-week program that I went on. It was free. It was for particularly people in their, I guess, diverse group. So as an all-female founding team, me and Becky, we were eligible, people from lots of different backgrounds on there. And they just taught us the basics. Here's a term sheet. Here's how to pitch. Here's what some of these terms mean that you'll have never heard of before, equity and shareholding and everything else. And at the end, they organized a meetup with investors. Someone was supposed to have rang around everybody who was similar to you and got them, but that person was sick. So when we turned up, there was hardly anybody there. There were just some people who always came to it. And no one wanted to speak to us because we weren't really in their wheelhouse. But an organization at that time called Startup Funding Capital, now SFC, had sent somebody along who I think took pity on us. Pretty sure the organizer said, can you just go and sit with those 2 women so that they've at least spoken to somebody and had a chance to do their pitch? And he sat down rather half-heartedly. And we said, you know, right, we're going to do our pitch anyway. We know you're not interested, but like, let us practice. And by the end, he said, I am interested, come on in. And not only with them were we able to get their investment, but actually they were part of something called the London Co-Investment Fund. So they said, we can actually give you, I can't quite remember how much it was, but they could match fund it from the London Co-Investment Fund. So we ended up raising around £230,000 just because we ended up with more than we thought.
Wow. And that was a totally random investor that they told that told to speak to you to because they felt sorry for you, that no one else was talking to you.
Yeah, which again, I think there is a lesson here in, you know, lots of people talk about you've got to go through lots of no's, but also I think you might have to go through lots of random routes, people who don't seem like they're interested, people who are a bit half-hearted, people who might not be the right one. If you can get in a room and give them your best, you never know, they might be the ones who come around. And I will say that when we went in and pitched to them properly a few weeks later, that also didn't go very well. On my way there, I tripped up. I had a terrible habit of falling over, and I ripped my trousers, and I turned up with an actual hole in my trousers and a bloody knee. I looked like some kind of Treasure Island castaway, but they still gave us the money.
So do you think that's a good tip for founders then?
Walk in. I did make a joke about it. I said, I am willing, you know, to get on my knees and scrub if that's what the workload takes.
Well, yes. I mean, that is such a strange story. So basically, at any point of that, did you actually go and write a pitch deck, or was this a sort of you know, person-to-person presentation and you didn't actually have a sort of PDF pitch deck document? Tell us about that.
No. We absolutely did have a pitch deck, even if I was taking someone who I know might be interested in giving us a few £1,000s as an angel investor, and we were sat in Wagamama chatting about it, I would still get out my printed pitch deck and go through it slide by slide for a couple of reasons. I'm a teacher by trade, as is my co-founder. And I think it's a good way of having a visual aid, a learning tool. It helps people remember what you're talking about. I think the process of doing the pitching deck is also really important. We recently won the Learning Tools competition, which is a big global competition in EdTech that's run by people like the Gates Foundation, the Schmitz Foundation, and so on. And there was a 4-minute pitch at the end. And I think us having practiced in the past, having pitch decks and getting very good at doing those 4-minute pitches was one of the main reasons we won. Got a very solid product, but you've got to make it understandable for people in 4 minutes. And if you can't do that, you're going to really struggle to sell your product anyway.
Yeah, that is an absolute key, the 4-minute kind of rule. Would you say that was there a sort of hook in the presentation that you noticed, or people's eyebrows raising at certain points?
Yeah, we've been very clear on the problem solution throughout, and it's never changed for us, despite the fact that we've changed the company a lot, we've pivoted, we've grown, we do different things now. But ultimately, there is a problem across the world that about 1/3 of teachers leave within 5 years, and everybody wants to solve it. but it's very difficult because you can't talk to them. They're not at the end of the phone. They're not on computers all day. Surveying them, interviewing them, focus groups, very difficult. The government had even stopped doing their surveys on teachers. So the solution is you have to get to them directly. And because we sat on teachers' phones, we're very quick. It's just once a day. And we use that data to drive impact. We can bring those teachers on board with us whilst also delivering that research service that other people need to do good things in the world, but can't get hold of the teachers. And it stops the teachers getting inundated by 53 people every day asking you for a phone call.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds to me like you had a very, very clear kind of win-win strategy for both sides.
But that to me, I don't know about other businesses that well. I'm very much an education person, but it strikes me that that should always be where you're coming from. And that can look different in different worlds. But if you look at any pitch decks, you know, you go back to your classics of Airbnb, there is a story that they began with around people going to conferences in towns where the hotels were full. And so you need to sleep on somebody's sofa. And then you build it out from there. And it's a win-win for everybody, right? It's a win for those conferences. It's a win for the sofa person, and it's a win for the person who's got the sofa. Like, everybody wins. And if you can come up with those strategies, I think it's important. And even in our second pitch deck, when we went back and raised in 2019, we had a slightly different proposition. And now when I talk to people about Teacher Tapp, even though we're not actively raising, I still have a kind of mission and a goal and a narrative that we're talking about.
Okay, so let's talk about the timeline between. So now you've kind of touched upon the fact that you've maybe raised 3 times. Is that the case?
No. So the first amount of money was a grant that was just given to us. Then in 2019, we did the first raise, and we got all of that lovely money by the summer of 2019. It took us about 6 months to know what to do with it. And then, of course, the timeline hits upon COVID. So we actually found ourselves raising again in 2021 because COVID threw us off our plan a little bit.
And how much do you think your presentation changed then during that time? Because I'm guessing the business evolved and changed, and from doing the first iteration of the pitch deck and getting that and that being successful, how much did you have to change it for the next time you reached out?
Enormously, mainly because our first full-time salaried contracted kind of set of employees came on board the 1st of March 2020, and everyone will know that COVID hit later that month. And in England, you had to have had your payroll paid by the 19th of March to be able to furlough anybody. And our people were all paid on the 24th. So we couldn't furlough anybody. And the research projects that we had for schools that year, a lot of them started to fall apart because, of course, schools closed. There were no inspections. There were no exams. So all the kinds of things that you would normally be researching stopped. So we now have less money coming in. The world is falling apart, and we've got 3 employees who we need to pay and who I am not going to fire at the beginning of a global pandemic when there are no jobs, but we can't furlough them. So what do we do? And what we did at that time was we spoke with some of the research founders and donors, the sorts of people who gave us the money in the first instance. And there was a bit of cash available if we were interested in building a parent equivalent. So we built something called Parent Ping in about as much time as we built the original Teacher Tapp. We also expanded to some other countries at that same time as well. So we've got panels in Belgium and in the Netherlands. And we just sort of stuck at it for a few months. And then by the summer, everybody realized, my goodness, we can't research schools anymore, but we need to research what's happening. And teachers have this on their phone. So we got really busy by the middle of 2020. The downside of that was we now had an extra product, Parent Ping, that we hadn't really planned for. And our tech debt was starting to catch up with us because we had so many different things on the go at a very constrained time. So as we got towards the end of 2020, I thought, how do we actually make sure that we've got enough cash to deliver on everything? And we went out to market at that point to get some more funding on both Parent Ping and Teacher Tapp, and how we would try and expand internationally. That was our goal at that moment in time, because that's what was driving forwards. And that was a very exciting and compelling offer to a number of people who'd seen us on the journey so far. So they did follow-on funding. But also we attracted Twinkle Hive. Twinkle are a very big education publisher in the UK. They've been phenomenally successful. They have a great ethos about giving back. And what they wanted to do was, instead of becoming a big monolithic entity, was support other businesses that had the same mission as them to help educators in the UK and across the world. And they invested in us in that second round as well, with the mission of Teacher Tapp, parenting, and going international.
And I'm just still curious about, like, because it sounds to me, I'm still struggling as to see where the revenue it comes into the industry, because I think, you know, investors obviously, you know, some of them want to do it for good causes and they want to do it for impact and all that sort of stuff, but they need to see returns, right? I mean, there's not many investors that would do it, you know, purely for the goodness of their heart. So can you tell us about how did the revenue streams coming in change? It must have evolved during this whole
over time. It's been largely the same. It's just that we've got better at coming up with products that will work for the people who commission the research. So a lot of it is people who want to ask questions. If you think about YouGov, massive IPO'd, huge company across the world that has lots of people who pay it to ask questions and get information. That's essentially what we do, but we do it in education, and we do it for the teachers in a very specific way, because they're a hard group otherwise for polling agencies to get hold of. So that's the main part of the revenue. Our plan initially was to do that for parenting as well. So it would be a parent panel, but we didn't have specialist expertise in that. Lots of those other marketing companies do. So actually, after we raised, we took a decision after 6 months along with the board that we would not continue with parenting, but instead what we had identified was that parents were really motivated to talk to their schools and their school leaders, and schools were coming to us saying, can we have a Teacher Tapp for our school? And so we now have a revenue stream as well, which is schools who can survey their parents, their pupils, their teachers, and benchmark against our national database. So we're constantly getting feedback of what's happening all across the country. And then school leaders can also survey in their schools to find out how similar or different they are. And that's a paid for service. So we've kind of got two parts of the business: the commissioned research for lots of policymakers, commercial organizations, education organizations, and we deliver for the schools as well, so they can really find out what parents, pupils, and staff are thinking.
And I guess the longer you go on and the more traction you get, the more valuable the data becomes, the more you can charge for your service, right?
Well, I just think there's more people who want to take part in it. Probably in terms of the research, there is a limit on that. And again, there is a limit in terms of schools. But obviously, the better the product is, the more schools want to come on board, then the more sustainable that business becomes. We do also have panels in other countries, and it would be very easy for us now to set up panels with the school survey business in other countries where they could become sustainable and potentially profitable as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. So the kind of branching out, you know, establishing a foothold in the UK and then going out to other European territories, was that something that investors encouraged or helped you with? And how did that relationship go?
No, I mean, in fairness, we've picked investors who've been very trustworthy and supportive in what we do. So I think anything that we get as an opportunity, we've gone back to them and they've largely said yes. But what happened there was that there were universities that came to us from other countries that wanted to do research, and we set it up as a license agreement. And that's how those ones have worked for the last couple of years. So they're not commercial in that they don't then go on and sell any further questions. But what they do is they license the stuff that we've built based on the investment that we've had.
Okay, interesting. So I want to go back to, as this is about investments and getting investments and stuff like that. So I want to talk about the raise, and you can pick any one of the different raises that you did. But did you find that during the process of presenting to investors, was there investors that really ripped it apart, and how did you react to that?
I don't think anybody did that to our face. So I'm quite lucky from that perspective. With SFC the second time, we had to do a pitch to a lot of their shareholders. They take investment from a broad range of people, and we did do one of theirs. There were some very difficult questions, and I remember one investor really dug down into our financials and our business model, but he did come on board actually. So although he gave me the hardest time, he was the most interested. And I would say from other pitches I've done in the past from different things, often when you walk away thinking you've had the hardest questions, that's actually when the people are most interested. The worst situation is to have people kind of go, okay, fine, next.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I promote a lot of decks, and it's just been met with a wall of silence. And the ones that do get a good grilling, you know, you think this goes bad, but actually they are the most interested. So that's a very good rule, very good tip there for any founders.
I should also say at the very beginning of starting the business, before we'd gone for investment or during the period when we were going, someone who is a big investor in the edtech world sent me an email, and I think it had 37 points of complaint, concern, or dislike about our business. Right. So he had really hammered me in just a million different directions. Obviously, I was a bit taken aback that someone who I'd never even spoken to had just sent me what felt like an absolute torrent of criticism. But I got in touch with him. I answered as many of his questions as I possibly could. I think we spoke on the phone, and he remains to this day someone whose views I will call, I will ask. He's been absolutely brilliant. And, you know, so again, I wouldn't necessarily take somebody asking lots of questions or even being negative to be a negative thing overall. It can be that they're very interested, and that's also just the way they think about the world.
Well, it could also be that they're really trying to help you, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe he wanted a bit of attention, and, you know, he was interested, and maybe the sort of people that he is interested in working with are the sort of people who do respond positively to those things. And it's a way of kicking the tires, of seeing, you know, when the chips are down or you're really under pressure, how are you going to respond? Because some people don't respond well, and that will tell you in future board meetings, if you criticize something, how they're going to be.
Yeah. So how did you react then?
I mean, I tend to react quite well to criticism, but then that's because I taught. And so I'm used to, you know, no one's going to throw a chair at my head and swear at me. So it's not that bad. I've spent a lot of my last 10 years in career doing media. So once you've been a newspaper editor, everybody wants to criticize you and take a piece of you. It doesn't mean I don't get upset personally or take it to heart in other ways, but especially if it's very pragmatic. If you're asking me specifics about the business, that's not even really a criticism. That is just wanting to know more. Calling me a dickhead, throwing a class chair at me and walking out, that is a bit more personal.
Yeah, I mean, you've had some of the toughest audiences there are then with kids and with newspaper editors and now investors. So you must have the thickest skin of any founder.
It varies. And I will also say that it does take a toll. And I wouldn't want to put out on here an impression that, yeah, I don't care what people think of me. It washes off. You know, I think too many entrepreneurs are put in a position where they have to say things like that. And it's not true that it doesn't catch up with you at all. But what it doesn't do, I suppose, is stop me or think that we shouldn't be doing the business. That's probably the key.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So let me ask you, what questions did you not expect investors to come up with that you were hit with, especially in face-to-face or by email, anything like that?
One of the questions that's thrown me off the most is when people are dismissive, as though anybody could do this. Right. Like, what makes you so special? I could hack this together tomorrow in my kitchen. And this is an app that we've clearly developed over 4 or 5 years, that we have got thousands of people on board with, that takes a big team to run, that I think has had a lot of traction, and yet somebody can just throw that at you. I always find that question a little bit tricky and challenging, because of course anybody could do this, but other people haven't done it, or you've already explained why they're not as good. So that's one. The other one that always throws me off is we have 10,000 people a day on the app. Like, they actually turn up and answer the questions, but people constantly ask me, no, but how many people actually do this? And I'm like, it's 10,000. Yeah, but how many actually answer? No, 10,000. I can show you on the app, 10,000 actually answered yesterday. So you're telling me 10,000 people actually opened this app? Yes, that actually happened. And then you'll show them some other figures in due diligence, and they go, wow, this thing really happened. And I've sort of come to the conclusion, is everybody going to pitches just sort of winging it and hoping that nobody really checks? I can't work that out, but that is something that comes up a lot. There is a sense of, is this real? Is this true? And I didn't realize that maybe there is so much bullshitting. You do have to put a lot of effort into, if you are giving facts, being really clear about it, and also being clear about when you're talking about the future. So it doesn't mean that you shouldn't give bigger numbers or possible numbers, but maybe you need both. Whereas I've tried to stick just to the facts and not had enough bluster. I probably needed to be like, this is what it really is today, and this is where I genuinely think we could get to tomorrow, because without both of those numbers, they tend to think something weird is going on. Yeah,
I mean, that is incredible traction. There's no doubt. And I think what you've done there is you've created an app which has caused, habit forming behavior.
Yeah.
And that is just gold for anyone. And that is something, when the people saying, oh, well, anyone could make this, well, they can, but you've got that habit forming connection where people do use it every day. So that, I think investors, the smart investors will see that and think, well, we've got to get onto this.
I hope so. And I think that's probably, again, a lesson for anybody, or if I was starting again and redoing raises. I think those proof points, those traction points, it's easy to say and hard to deliver sometimes, but without them, you are always going to be a bit of a disadvantage. Some people are great at selling a dream, and that's wonderful. But if you are a slightly more reluctant or a first-time entrepreneur, or you lack any kind of confidence, I think being able to have 2 or 1 major traction point where you can say, look, we did this thing already, this is why we know it's going to work, enables you to feel more confident in those moments when people do want to check on you, drag you down a little bit to test whether you're real or whether you're just making it up.
Yeah, but I mean, it all comes out in due diligence, right? I mean, this is the thing. So anyone could say anything. The thing is, quite a lot. What you sort of touched on there was like, maybe you might not have even put the fact that you had 10,000. So sometimes we sort of gloss over the facts that are so obvious, and actually they're really important. You need someone else to say, no, you need to talk about that. The fact that 10,000 people a day turn up.
Yeah, I lesson from journalism, I think, is that a good noun or a good fact is really important in making you memorable. And so you need to have on every slide, I think, one, what I would call key fact or factoid, the sort of thing that on Radio 2 they would have read out in the afternoon as the fun fact about your business. And we have a few of those, 10,000 teachers every day. And then what I tend to add is, and that includes Christmas Day. And then we show the number on Christmas Day, we lose about 400 people. The specificity of that is really important for the narrative, because then people really believe you and they understand that it's every day, right? That gets it across. I think when we talk about our global ambitions, we can say we started here in England, Netherlands and Flanders. The fact we talk about the 2 and give them their name is just that bit of specificity. And it's the sort of thing from journalism that has been helpful, although I sometimes pick things that are maybe more interesting and not always business worthy. And that's where I've had to work with coaches to work out what's novel versus what's useful.
Okay, let's just go back to that the investment phase again. Was there anything in any point of the raise, talking to investors and even having positive meetings and then going into sort of due diligence phases, was there anything that you weren't prepared for during the investment raise?
I've always found the legal and contracting side quite heart-stopping, because I am a person who understands my industry of education really, really deeply, but I don't know business that well. There's a lot of terminology and some of it is quite confusing. Finding good lawyers who can explain things to you is really important, but also very expensive at a time when you don't have money. That's why you're going out to get it. And so I found that really nerve-wracking and hard work, and I still do. The other thing I would say is it's a bit like buying a house. You need a lot of administrative things that you don't really understand and won't do very often, all to line up at once. And that's incredibly stressful because you're not in control of a lot of it. It's like having, especially in a second raise where there's more people involved, it's like having a 6-house chain and you're responsible for absolutely everybody's move. Now, having done it twice, the thing I can tell myself is that moment will come. Just like you will likely move house, the chances are everybody wants this to happen. And so everybody's behavior in the end is all going to point in the right direction. The window will open up and everybody will move through. You have to have patience, belief, and sort of an iron stomach while you don't understand it to ride out the storm. But once you get that opening, it will go ahead. And so keeping optimism in the face of uncertainty is just a psychological game. I find it really hard. It's not my favorite. But I think that's the only way to describe the experience that most people have. Some people love it, and I can see how there's a bit of an adrenaline hit. That's like some people love buying houses so much they go and set up a property company. Other people think, my goodness me, I'm never moving house again. That was too painful. And I think I'm probably in the it's quite painful, but if I have to do it, I believe in myself to do it in the future way.
Well, you've done it so far successfully. So, there's lots of tips here already that people are getting hold of. I mean, So how long do you think it took from meeting your ideal investor to the first funds hitting your business account and going through that whole process? And also just going back on that, what you were saying then, was there anyone that helped you through that legal process?
So from meeting the ideal investors to money in the bank, probably 3 months in both cases. Obviously, you've got to add on the period of time to get to meet that investor. So I would say in both cases, we were probably looking at a 6 to 7 month. From the moment we kind of went, I think we're going to need to do this, to 3 months of planning, prepping, meeting people, finally got the right one. Then there's that 3 month phase. In both cases, we decided to take investment at broaching over a financial year. So for example, some investors came in on the end of March, and some came in at the beginning of April. So that gave them the biggest freedom with their tax burdens to move things around. But also what it did was it meant there was a fairly clear close date. Like we had to get this stuff over the line before the end of the financial year. And I think that was very helpful. The downsides is everybody in the industry is also in the similar position. So all the lawyers are stressed, the accountants are stressed, you're stressed, everybody's busy. It's possible for mistakes to be made at that point. On the other hand, it does mean you've got an end point and you can kind of get over that hump, and you're probably in. So at a much bigger size or a much bigger raise or a more complicated raise, maybe it doesn't work as well. But, when you're small and this is important, but if it all doesn't come across, you'll figure something else out, then I would say it's worth doing at that point in time to get it pretty hard closed and out the way and move on. In terms of who helped us, we just asked around for some lawyers that people had. They were fine. And I think, who knows, I feel like we've had as good legal advice as you could, but you just never know. And you have to accept that if it wasn't right, well, you'll have to figure it out further down the line.
Yeah. And was there any point in which you allowed yourself a moment of celebration when the money came in, and what did that look like?
Yeah, in the second round, which was in the pandemic. So if you remember, there wasn't a lot that you could do. It wasn't like you could go out and have a big meal or any kind of team meeting. So what I'd done was I'd bought myself a really nice blouse that I'd wanted for ages. And 4 weeks before the investment planned end, I put it on the back of the door. And if we didn't close, I had to send it back.
Okay.
And so every day I would look at it and I would be like, right, that's, and it would already sold out. So if I sent it back, that would have been the end of it. And so when I got to wear that, and in fact, every time I wear it, I'm quite grateful to myself that I've managed to keep hold of this item that I really wanted. So that was a good bit of, the one thing you could do in the time of a pandemic.
It's like the physical representation of success was a blouse in your case.
It was. That is exactly it. And when it's one of those pieces of clothing, I don't know if you've ever had this, but there's some items that when you put them on, you just feel better. You feel like, yeah, I can go out and do this today. It was that item for me. And so it does represent that sense of like, yeah, we achieved something that was really hard as a team. We all pulled together. We negotiated this. We got through the due diligence. Like we can go on and deliver on the things we've promised.
Yeah, well, I guess in sort of NLP terms, it's your anchor, isn't it? That is anchored to that feeling and that success. And the same with like if you have a piece of clothing, it's anchored to something. It reminds you of something.
Yeah, I think that was it for me. A blouse on the back of the door.
Cool. Okay, so let's talk about that second amount of money that came in. Did you have, because now you've got a large amount of money in, was it earmarked? What was the first thing you kind of spent your money on in the business when you got that fund, when they got those funds in?
Getting more software engineers at that moment in time. We had gone a long way with our original co-founder, Alex, who, as I say, was a full-time teacher when he came on board trying to put stuff together. But we needed to bring in more expertise and more people into the team at different levels. And so that's where the majority of the money goes. And in education, sometimes I think that people will see that you'll get some money. We recently won a prize of $250,000. People are like, okay, you must be swimming in cash. In reality, that's going to get you a senior software engineer for 2 years. That's it, money gone. And so it enabled us to get on with that, to hire some more people on operations and to get ourselves really established in a new framework, which is what we've done. And then because we were in a good state going forwards, we've been able to now invest in building the school surveys part of the business that helps the school leaders. We weren't expecting to do that. We thought we'd do international, but it just proved too difficult in the post-pandemic world to do. And so we closed Parent Ping, but built school surveys. And that was the two things that we had to do.
Okay, so how accurately do you think it followed from what you put as a presentation together for investors in terms of earmarked funds? How accurately did that pan out in reality when you had the funds? Was it the same kind of percentages? Was it accurate, and did they check?
It was quite different, but I think I said before, we went out looking at Parent Ping originally, and then within 6 months, it became apparent that that wasn't going to be the best bet. So what I did was we had a board that we put together. I've always been really up for the idea that there should be a board. One of the things I liked about the fact that our original funding required us to be a business was that you had to have people who are kind of shareholders, and that there is more than the accountability of just you running it yourself. And so we spoke to the board about our plans, what we wanted to do. We have budgets that we pass by them. Again, it's very light touch. I think we've picked people who've got very aligned interests with us, but we weren't doing anything with investors' money that wasn't in the right direction for where we all wanted to go.
So now you've got some good money in and you're really sort of cooking. What does the future look like for Teacher Tapp?
So for us, there are two really key things. One is working with those schools that are signed up on school surveys to make sure that their leaders are hearing their community and actually delivering change on the ground, making that platform as solid as possible so that they can do that quickly, easily, and deliver on the change. So I've got a team working on that. And then on Teacher Tapp, we've now been going for 6 years. So we wanted to innovate, which is what the Learning Tools competition is helping us do. And there are two parts to that. One is the teachers at the moment share lots and lots of information with us, and we use it in policy, but we don't tell them if they are struggling with their job. And if you remember, that was the original problem. We wanted teachers not to leave. And so we want to be able to flag back to teachers if there are any issues, and maybe give some interventions to try and help them feel more attached to their job, less isolated. If there's specific problems that they're struggling with, some resources to deal with it. And we are building the infrastructure to do that over the next 12 months. So that's going to be quite exciting and a step change, because it's not just then information going one way, it's information going back to the teachers to make them even more powerful. And if we can help improve retention, not just by having a community of people who like it and they do tell us, they stay, and it helps them be motivated. But if we can really target both at the school level and at the teacher level to improve teachers' lives, then we will be even more on track for where we wanted to be. And if by the end of 10 years, we're able to prove that we've done that, I think that'll be really quite an incredible thing.
So during your raise for Teacher Tapp, what would you say was the biggest thing you got right during the whole process, or what was the biggest tip you can give to a founder now looking to raise?
I had good advice from another founder who showed me his list of investors who he decided that he wanted to target and why, kind of how he'd gone through systematically. If anyone gave him feedback, wrote it down, and then worked on it before the next one. And I think that for us was quite key. We only had a small pool that we were willing to work with. We spent a long time online doing the research to work out who was right, and then being quite systematic, going through that with a good pitch deck, with a good offer, not inflating our values, just being really clear about what we wanted and why, and focusing. And if you can do that, it will save you a lot of time rather than a real scattergun approach.
Yeah, absolutely. So on the flip side, what do you think the biggest mistake was that you made during the whole fundraising process?
This is going to sound strange, but in some senses, I maybe took it too seriously. I think I am a person who finds this kind of business quite hard. I don't know if other people do and people aren't that honest about it or what, but I've never found this aspect of the business particularly easy. And so I yeah, I think I just really believed that if I didn't get it all right, if every single aspect wasn't brilliant and perfect, if everybody wasn't happy, if we made any mistakes, this kind of house of cards was all going to fall down and then the world would end. And having gone through it twice and maybe growing up and improving and being in leadership that little bit longer, you learn that it's okay. You know, if you don't 100% pull it off the first time, there'll be other opportunities, that you will have a sense of what's right for your business. And because somebody else has done it that way, it doesn't mean that their way is right or your way is wrong, that there's lots and lots of opportunities open to you. And maybe just think about it more as a set of conversations about how you are going to get the finance and capital to make sure that the next step on your journey works. It's as simple as that. You wouldn't stress out if you needed to, get some financing for your car. Just think of it in a very similar terms. There are options available to you. You'll find them out. And if you made a mistake with it, well, then you'll figure that out later down the line as well. Obviously, do as much due diligence as you can, be sensible, get advice, but it's not the end of the world. And it's not the only thing that you should have in your whole life. Got to keep it in a bit of proportion.
Yeah, that's absolutely fantastic advice. I think a lot of people will really take that on board. I hope they do. So finally, I want to, it'll kill me if I don't do this, but I want to give a shout out to the guy that put us together, which is, I think we've got a shared sales coach, Anthony Stears. You know him very well, don't you?
Yeah. So at the very beginning of all of this, in the summer of 2018, there was this day when I sort of put my head on the desk and I realized that I was going to have to do this thing called a raise, which to me is like asking for help, talking to people, not just being behind my computer. And as someone who's been a journalist, I think people would think I should naturally be very good at that. But I'd actually been an editor and had lots of other people out doing those things on my behalf. And I was really terrified of phoning people. I was really terrified of asking for help. And so I got in touch with Anthony because I knew at that time he did telephone training to help you telephone people. But really, he's been a phenomenal business coach throughout the whole thing. And at times when I've taken things very seriously, struggled, not believed in myself, I think he's been very, very good at reminding me that actually it's okay, and giving really good sales, business, and everything else advice. So yeah, big shout out to him because he's pretty phenomenal. I guess he's probably helped you as well in different ways.
Yeah, big time. I mean, I meet up with him most weeks. Very good. I mean, I think it's a testament to coaching in general. You know, like that it can make such a difference. You know, because I'm an entrepreneur, you're an entrepreneur. You know, a lot of time it's quite lonely, even if you do have a business partner. You know, there's a lot of your sort of friends and family, they don't understand the journey you're going through. You know, so to have a business coach and someone great like Anthony, you know, to talk to and to share ideas and to get that different perspective, I think is really important. I mean, have you had other really powerful business coaches in your career?
I think I've just been really lucky in the last 6 years that I've had lots and lots of mentors in different varieties. I've got an incredible board. I mean, the chair of our board, Andrea Carr, is just incredible. She ran her own education business, Rising Stars, and has really helped all of us shape the direction that we're going in. I had a variety of friends on WhatsApp mainly who I could send daft questions to. I mean, I remember asking about 3 of them, how do you get the money? Right? Like no one had answered that question. I didn't feel like I could go to the investors and go, do I take a check? I mean, I almost had this idea that I needed to have a till or a sort of like a swipe card machine or something for my phone. And every time I would ask this question, people would laugh, but not answer me because I think they thought it was a joke. And so the people who were on the end of WhatsApp who went, Laura, they just put it in your bank. I was outraged. What? They just put the money in my bank. Yeah, that's how this works. I couldn't fathom it. But you've got to have, I would say, 3, 4, 5 people who can be at the end of a WhatsApp for your daft questions or for the days where your head is on the table and just tell you it's okay. They put it in your bank or some other sensible answer to your question. And that gets you through. Yeah.
Well, that's a great way to end the interview with the money in the bank, which is fantastic. And hopefully everyone listening to this will get the chance to get money in their bank when they go for the investment round as well. But thank you so much, Laura, for a brilliant chat and some great insights. And thank you very much.
Cheers.